Welcome to the kickoff episode of the Be Your HR Best webinar series. We're here in the studios here in our Tyson's office of Berenzweig Leonard. BLC Digital Strategies is doing the webinar here today. We've got Todd Castleberry on the other side of this wall here and his great production team putting this on. I'm Declan Leonard. I'm managing partner here at Berenzweig Leonard, and I also head up the firm's employment law practice.
It's good to be here with you, Declan. I am Nick Johnson. I'm a partner here at Berenzweig Leonard, and also work with Declan here in our firm's employment law practice.
Nick, great to be here with you. And I know what everybody out there is thinking, another webinar where employment lawyers scold HR people about what they can and cannot do in the workplace.
Boring.
It's like coming off of New Year's Eve, and it's a bit of a buzzkill. But I will say, we're trying to do something a little bit different here. The intent of this webinar is to be very forward-thinking. We don't want you to have a situation where you come away from this and walk on eggshells for the rest of the year.
That's right. And Declan, in the lead up to this seminar, we've received some really good questions, and we've got a live Q&A function that, for those of you that are participating, please, we encourage you, send us your questions. We're going to try and get to them in the time that we have here. But we've had some really, really good questions from HR leaders, business owners, and what's really interesting is, I think you and I, we kind of got together, we talked about, what are some topics we want to cover. It was actually pretty consistent with some of the questions and the feedback that we got from participants. And, I think of all the questions that we received, one of the ones that was the most frequent was, okay, on the state level, and now you're starting to see it on the federal level, there's this constantly changing and new employment laws that are going into effect. I mean, just recently, Maryland passed a law expanding the definition of sexual harassment.
Yeah, that just came in this morning.
I mean,
it was passed, but it was just announced, yeah.
New Jersey had a first of its kind mini Warren Act. I mean, we all know, we've talked on the podcast before about the sea change in Virginia 2 years ago. You're seeing, this constant change of employment laws. And the question that we get and that we got, from participants is, how do you maintain consistency with your workforce in light of all of these changes?
Yeah, it's very easy to view this as almost like drinking from the fire hydrant. I mean, when you're in the HR world, you're seeing this stuff come out. Most people are getting SHRM daily announcements in your inbox. And it's very easy to look at this and say, oh my God, this is just a time suck. This is a resource drain. I feel like, again, I'm walking on eggshells about what I can and cannot do. But what we want you to do, and hopefully through these series of webinars, starting with today's, is maybe look at it a little bit differently. Look at it a little bit more in a forward-looking, proactive, that when you stay on top of this, and listen, it's not easy, but there are resources out there to help you stay on top of it. It actually is good for employee morale. It's good for employee retention, and that's the name of the game these days.
That's right. And so let's get into the specifics. I mean, so, you're a business owner, you're an HR executive, and you've got all of these changing laws. I mean, what is one concrete thing that companies, HR professionals can do at the start of the year to address this challenge?
Yeah, I hate this word audit, but it is the most accurate description. Doing an HR audit, just basically taking a step back, because we all know communication, transparency, and the best way you do that, or one good way you do that, is to make sure you got the policies, everything in place. And so this is the basic stuff. To me, this is always the low-hanging fruit. You want to start off and look, what are my policies and procedures? What are my agreements sitting out there? And do they tell my employees what they need to know to be successful at a company? So it's not just a matter of, man, I've got this provision in there that's going to get my employee in case they do X, Y, and Z. It's really a matter of transparency, making sure that the employees, look at it from the employee's perspective. They're coming into a company. A lot of times they're not privy to what, management's talking about all the time. These policies should be designed to give them some solace that the company has their best interests at heart.
That's right. And when we're talking about this HR audit, I mean, I always say, go through the employment life cycle. Yeah. Make sure that there's consistencies in your policies, in your documents, so that, it's messaged to your employees. So we're talking offer letter, employment agreement, employee handbook. I mean, those are some of the biggest things that you want to look at as part of this HR audit to make sure, one, that it's up to date, and two, that your policies and procedures are consistent with the messaging and the culture that you're trying to create as an organization.
Yeah, and I would say even before the offer letter, just the application process and the hiring process. I mean, we did a real world employment law series on this not too long ago, talking about pay transparency and all the different laws that are coming into effect. We're not going to spend a lot of time. We've got an hour here today, so we want to cover a lot of this stuff. We're available afterwards in terms of if you want to send us questions and all that, but we'll try to cover as much as we can. But let's jump into some of the questions that we actually got. And as we pick these questions, we also sort of conform them to things that we handle for our clients all the time. These are not like unique one-off anomaly type things. These are things that are reoccurring.
Sure. So one of the first questions that we got, and this has been a big issue that's been getting a lot of attention on the federal and the state level, dealing with proper classification. And so the question is, if my company's employment agreement or if my company's agreement with my workers states that someone is an employee and the employee agrees to it and sign it, does that protect me from misclassification? And actually, I think what they meant was if they agree to be an independent contractor, does that mean that that's what controls? If the agreement says, hey, we agree to be independent contractors, regardless of the nature of my work, does that bind the company? Is that what controls?
We get this question a lot, and listen, we try to when we give employment law advice, we try to understand what's the reality that people are dealing with, because when you talk about misclassification, it sounds harsh. It's like people are nefariously sitting back and saying, "Aha, I'm going to throw a 1099 designation at you versus an employment and cheat you out of benefits." Well, here's what happens sometimes in practice. You've got an employee, a worker, let's just say a worker because employee would be a W-2 employee, who they may already get benefits through their spouse. They may get health insurance through their spouse. They may get, and they may not need those benefits. And so they may come to the employer. We see it time and time again and say, listen, treat me as a 1099. I want as much take-home income as I can get. I'll deal with the taxes later on. Those will be my responsibility. And so companies come to us all the time and say, if we go back and deny them that request, that's going to be a morale issue. They're going to be not happy with us. How do we handle that? Can we just tell them, well, if we both agree, all's cool? Does that work?
No, it doesn't work. I mean, in fact,
Never.
the law is very unforgiving about this. Virginia just passed a misclassification law that's been in effect now for a couple of years. It's got some real teeth to it. I mean, it's something that provides a private cause of action for misclassified workers, and the remedies can be quite punitive. And so, the focus is not so much on what the company designates the person as, but rather the nature of the work. And really, there's a factor test that the courts look at. There's an IRS multi-factor test. I think the main thing that those tests look at is control, and really, the control over the type of work that's being done. But companies need to be mindful of this, and it's not really how you designate someone.
So from an HR perspective, rather than say, no, you can't do that, it's really more a matter of setting expectations, communicating why or why not we cannot do this. Because I've had companies who just say, we're rejecting your request. But really, we're trying to look at this from a morale standpoint, from a retention standpoint, to make sure that there are no hard feelings as a result of it, that the company really does have that employee's best interest at heart. And in fact, by doing so, probably is helping them out on a tax perspective also.
And actually, to your point about, doing this, out of the interest of morale and retention, the remedies that are available when companies get this wrong, it actually reflects that. So, previously the remedies used to just be, the tax treatment, maybe if there was a minimum wage issue or an overtime issue.
Yeah.
When Virginia changed the law, they basically said, in addition to all of those damages, you also can get attorney's fees. But here's the kicker, you can also get the benefits that employees are otherwise entitled to. So kind of pull this out a little bit.
Yeah.
Think about it, if someone was classified as an independent contractor when they should have been an employee, if they had to go out of pocket on healthcare cost while they were, classified as an independent contractor.
Yeah.
Those are damages. If they were part of an organization that for other employees, they did a 401k match, that could be damages that would be available. And so, it's really imperative from a retention and a morale standpoint to make sure you get this classification stuff right.
Yeah, we all know that employees are motivated by a number of different things. Compensation, of course, benefits is a huge part of it. And as you rightly just pointed out, if an employee, if somebody that was wrongly characterized as a 1099 doesn't realize that, gosh, that whole time I could have been getting a 401k match, that's something that really is going to drive that person away to go work for another company where they can take advantage of those benefits. So it's good to view it in terms of that, because I think it's helpful. So I always think of the very first thing is employee handbooks. And whenever we do a review of an employee handbook, one of the things that I look for, employee handbooks, just for people out there, and I think most people are going to understand this, but these are not contracts in any way, shape, or form. They are only guidances. Nobody really can sue under an employee handbook, but they accomplish communication, which results in retention and high morale if you do it the right way. And so the first thing I always look at in an employee handbook is the leave policies. I always feel like that's the one area where handbooks have the most utility. I mean, they've got a lot of policies in there. They set expectations, but leave, the leave laws, whether it's vacation, whether it's sick leave, those are the things I look at, because 7 out of 10 times, I feel like it's inconsistent with what they're actually trying to accomplish. And now we've got flex leave and unlimited PTO.
Yeah.
That causes a lot of confusion too. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, a lot of companies are looking for ways to, and we're going to talk about retention later on, but they're looking for ways to, retain their workforce. And, flex leave, unlimited PTO, I mean, these are things that, companies it's on their radar, and they're looking to offer it to their employees. One of the questions that we got was, and I'll just read it for the group here, my staff has expressed an interest in unlimited PTO or flex time. What can I do to keep someone from taking advantage of a program like that?
But they would never do that, because unlimited PTO and flex time is sort of this utopia that everybody can just, no, I'm just kidding. It sounds great. It's a great benefit. Of course, the problems always come to the lawyers, and people say, well, wait a second. Now I've got an employee who has a serious medical condition, and they're saying, because we have unlimited PTO, unlimited time off, I'm going to go through my treatment process, for the next 4 months, and I expect it to be paid. And so, this is where it creates problems.
That's right.
And you got to grapple with how to deal with that. What are some of the ways that we can?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that companies can do. I mean, listen, these are great programs that, are really designed to just promote employee flexibility. And it's great that business owners are thinking about doing it. And I think, to address this question, there are some things that you can do to kind of set some guardrails, to set some parameters there. The first one is set expectations. We talked about communication at the very beginning of this, and that kind of goes hand in hand with this is, hey, you can take the time off that you need, but you still need to get the work done.
Yeah, performance is always going to be out there.
Make it clear that, that if you have certain business requirements, that those still need to be met, whether it's an hour requirement, if there's new pipelines, if there's new, just business requirements that need to be established, that, an employee taking time off, that does not do away with those requirements.
No, it's really, yeah, exactly. It's really intended to treat employees as they should be, as adults, as, we're not gonna micromanage. We're not gonna have this stringent, put in this, detailed request, provide all documentation of your trip to Aruba, and then we'll see if we okay it or not. I mean, that's not really what it's really just intended to be like, you're an adult. Get your work done, and guess what? If you have to do something within reason, do it. So I think unlimited sometimes a misnomer. I think if you have the right people on the bus, if you have the right employees, you're not going to run into those type issues. But it definitely sits out there. The area that we see it come into play is, again, long-term illnesses, and maternity leave is another area where it is. So, maternity leave and parental leave, It's another area that trips people up all the time. Maternity leave and parental leave should be dealt with as a whole separate policy.
Right.
That should be expressly exempted from an unlimited or flex
Same thing
PTO.
with sick leave, FMLA leave. Those should be exempted from the policy.
Yes.
If you want to take personal leave, vacation, that can be flexible time off or unlimited PTO. But you're right. Paternity leave, maternity leave, sick leave, FMLA, those are things that should be exempted from the policy. You know, another thing, and this kind of goes under the communication umbrella, is there needs to be a notice procedure, provision of some sort where, hey, if you're going to take a day or two off, okay, maybe a week's notice, something like that. If you're going to be gone for 2 weeks over in Europe, that's going to create a very large void in an organization. That's going to create a gap, and there needs to be planning. You need to give the company notice. You need to make sure that the company can, have someone, kind of fill in or at least cover things while you're gone. So, building in notice requirements that, hey, depending on the duration of the leave, you're going to give X number of weeks notice. Those are ways that you can kind of put some guardrails in there. I think another thing too is, if you're considering, unlimited PTO or flex leave, another thing that you can build in there is, hey, sometimes in very rare instances, we're going to have to reject these requests. If it's the end of our fiscal year, if it's the end of a buying season, what have you, we just can't accommodate a lot of people being out for this period of time. You need to apply that policy consistently.
Yep.
But you need to build in that flexibility that, hey, if business needs require it, we may not be able to grant every single request. And again, this would be rare instances.
And that's why the policy itself needs to really reflect this transparency, this communication. The communication is a two-way road. It's not just the company communicating these policies. Certainly that written policy should very much say all of the stuff that you're talking about, Nick. But also, it is also incumbent on employees to communicate back. Again, I look at it as it's treating employees as adults as they should be. And so, you're trusting them to do so, and they should respond accordingly. So, and in most cases, it does work fine. It's only in those unique circumstances that sometimes you see a wrinkle emerge. And then it becomes counterproductive because then, there's some resentment by the employee, and that's not what it's intended to be for. So,
and, one thing before we move on to the next topic, we've gotten some questions on this issue that I think we should just flag for the group is,
hopefully you know the answer. I don't.
We've seen it from at least from a Virginia standpoint. A lot of other states across the country are doing the same thing where they're protecting against wage theft and making sure that you're properly paying employees. And if we're talking, salary employees, that's pretty straightforward. Where I see and where you and I see a lot of this become an issue is when you have, performance bonuses, when you have commission-based employees.
Yeah.
Where I see it becoming an issue is there's not alignment in terms of, the company's expectations versus the employee's expectations. Maybe the company thinks, okay, this person didn't do what he or she was required to do to earn it. Okay, if that's your position, does the employee see it the exact same way?
Yeah.
And does the commission plan, does the bonus plan spell that out? When you're doing these HR audits, look at that. Look at your comp structures. Look at your commission plans. Look at your sales incentive plans. Make sure that, if there's an expectation that this is what you need to do to earn certain compensation, that the employee knows it. Again, we're talking about communication.
It boils down to that. And sometimes it is when the employee is still working there that this dispute arises. Can you imagine how uncomfortable and awkward that is? The employee has to basically challenge and say, this is what I thought it was. And sometimes it's significant money. You can pretty much be guaranteed that the employee, doesn't see this as a long-term fit going down.
Yeah.
They might stick around to get that money, but they don't see it as a long-term fit. So therefore, it doesn't accomplish anybody's goal of employee retention and keeping up morale.
That's right. And the law again, is unforgiving. We talked about this with misclassification.
Yeah.
Virginia's new Wage Theft Act.
Yeah.
It's not just unpaid wages that can be, that the employee can receive.
Yeah.
It's liquidated damages.
Yep.
It's attorney's fees. Very punitive. So it's really incumbent on these business owners to make sure they get it right.
DC is 4 times the amount is what you owe.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's crazy. It's very. You're right. The downside's huge. All right, what's the next topic that people wanted to talk
I think
about?
the second most common topic that we received questions about was employee retention and employee mobility. And I think employee retention is on every business owner's mind right now. I mean, obviously there's inflation, there's potential economic downturn. You've got the Great Resignation. It's the war for talent.
Yeah.
Retaining your employees, I mean, that is so imperative. And so, I mean, I think business owners across the country are thinking to themselves, okay, I've spent all these resources recruiting, finding, and hiring this employee. How do I protect against that investment leaving after a year, 6 months, whatever it may be?
Yeah, and I think COVID highlighted this because COVID basically showed that people could work from far away, and so the realm of what jobs that they could apply for just increased exponentially during COVID, and so people were just kind of like, look, I can live in Colorado and I can work all over the country, no matter where I want to work, if I can do a remote type arrangement. And so the competition for workplaces was no longer who's in my relevant industry. We're here in Northern Virginia and the DMV. It's no longer that. It's we're competing against West Coast firms. We're competing against Midwest firms, just all over. If people can do it remotely, so it's a critical issue. And of course the reflexive concept in the past has always been, well, I'll have them sign a non-compete. I'll lock them in. This contract will do it. Well, how's that working out?
Not so well. I mean, now obviously,
it does sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. It depends on where you are. If you're in California,
Yes.
But the thought that you can just have someone sign a non-compete and tie them down,
sleep well at night, and your employee force is stable.
I mean, obviously, the FTC has made an announcement of this proposed rule of a nationwide ban. It's not law yet as we sit here today in January of 2023.
Yeah, but they're hell-bent on doing it.
But
it seems like.
I mean, it reflects, just kind of the attitude towards these, that, they need to be pretty narrow. You see it on a statewide level. I mean, Virginia, you can't have low-wage employees subject to non-competes.
Yep.
Some states, they outright ban them.
Yeah.
And so, business owners need to think about other ways to go about retention and addressing employee mobility issues.
Yeah, I think it's one thing. So I've told clients, people call up and say, well, the FTC is going to ban it and stuff. And I say, yes, it does seem that way. It is also politics. And so, this is a limited cycle depending on, administrations changing, because this was not done through Congress. This would be done through an executive order and then through executive action through the Federal Trade Commission.
Right.
I always say, don't panic. Don't, start ripping up your restrictive covenants. But take a look at them and see, do they go overboard? Are they the type of draconian policies that people would look at and say, you know what, you're really just trying to lock somebody in? That doesn't mean you can't have, what I would call non-compete light, specific targeted non-solicitation. You're not going to go to the clients that you were the face of for our company and try to rip them away for your new employer. You're not going to take our confidential information, use it against us to unfairly compete. I think those will ultimately survive even, what's being done on the federal level and perhaps some of the stuff that's being done on the state level.
That's right. Yeah. And I think in addition to those that you appropriately just identified, narrow non-solicitation of employees. I mean, how devastating could it be for an organization if not just one person leaves, but your entire team leaves because of some, poaching effort or just kind of some of this orchestrated effort to take a big team of people? I mean, have narrowly defined non-solicitation of employee obligations that if one person leaves, okay, the entire team's not going to be poached or not going to be raided. I think the FTC has said that those aren't part of the focus of this new proposed rule.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing that business owners should be looking at. It's interesting. I was talking to a client the other day, today, and we're talking about this issue of
It's not attorney-client privilege.
I'm going to keep it general. Yeah. But retention and finding, retaining, growing talent is on everyone's radar.
Yeah.
But it's not just the businesses, but now it's also on the customers. There was a government contractor who was sharing with us that one of the government customers is now requiring that they certify as to their attrition rates. And customers want stability.
Yes.
Customers want to have the same employees, over and over again working with them. And so obviously, retention is something that business owners are thinking of, but now customers are starting to think of it.
So let's talk about, okay, you get whatever written policy that you have them sign from time to time at the inception of their employment or whatever. But what other things can companies be doing, maybe a little bit more, less on the legal side, a little bit more on the proactive and productive side to retain, to keep good talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of studies done about what's motivating retention, and I mean, I think some of those studies show that flexibility is key in this day and age, and so the ability to either have a hybrid work schedule or flexible leave, that's something that's really important to workers in today's economy. Unlimited or a version of just paid parental leave. That's important to today's workforce.
And remember, parental leave is again different than maternity leave, and I find that companies get tripped up on this concept all the time. Maternity leave, birth leave is basically what it is. Is really what it should be called, birth leave, because it has to be distinguished even from maternity leave, where there's an adoption or a fostering of a child, because it's got to really be gender neutral at the end of the day. Birth leave, obviously, not gender neutral, and that has to take into account the physical effects of the birthing process. And so that can be different. A lot of companies have, a lot of smaller companies in particular have short-term disability policies that will help bridge the gap. That's always a best practice. And then, some of the bigger companies, compete for, and again, you're right. It is a way to compete for talent, to say, guess what? We give all 12 weeks or even sometimes, 16 weeks of paid maternity leave, paid birthing leave, I should say.
Yeah.
But when you're giving leave just for purposes of bonding with the child, that's got to be gender neutral. We call that parental leave. We used to have, 10 years ago, it wasn't even that long ago, we would have maternity leave and paternity leave. Mothers would get this, fathers would get that. And that just does not comport with the way the law looks at things nowadays.
Yeah.
So,
a couple other things just to add in terms of retention that these studies are showing is mentoring is on the forefront.
Yeah.
And also, I think, just meaningful employee engagement. I think, the days of maybe like a free lunch and a keg in the office, those are nice. That's not what's going to keep your employees in the workplace.
A keg in the office. Now we're talking. Sign me up.
But I mean, I think meaningful employee engagement, where you're taking an interest in their professional development.
Yeah.
That's what means a lot to workers today. And that's what you need to think about.
And a term, I mean, this is so non-legal, but a term that is so underappreciated in the workforce is fairness. Like employees really crave fairness. And so I think what happens is, sometimes we see this demarcation between the HR function and then let's just say the direct supervisors, the managers, and HR is looking to make this extremely fair, and sometimes the managers are not making this quite as fair. There has to absolutely be a marrying up of both managers and HR to make sure that employees feel that they're being treated fair. I mean, I wrote an article one time called "Fairness Should Guide the Firing Process," because that oftentimes is the difference between whether or not somebody is sued or not sued. If an employee goes home and says, talks to their spouse, talks to their family, and people just start riling that employee up and say, that's just not fair. Legal and fair are two different things. But sometimes that will spur the employee to take action. I think fairness has to start way before the firing process, obviously, and should really, really govern the entire employment process.
Fairness and also communication. I mean, how many times have we been in meetings with clients where they say, I learned about this thing during an exit interview.
Yeah.
And had I known about this sooner, it would have been addressed. It never would have become an issue.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately, here we are.
Yeah, there's a new sort of trend of exit interviews. Those are good,
Yeah.
and actually even from a legal standpoint, those are good because in some cases, as us lawyers, we can then lock them in saying at no point did they ever mention X, Y, and Z, even in
Sure.
an exit interview. But that's not a retention tool, and so what we're seeing sometimes is some companies are doing performance evaluations. That's different. That should go by the ways. That's not really the firm culture. But now they're doing retention interviews, sometimes called stay interviews versus exit interviews, where they're sitting down and I would advise it be a combination of HR and supervisors, where you basically do a check-in with the employee and say, how are things going here? It's not performance related. It's not like we're going to give you anything between a 1 and a 5, because I think those put the guard up with the employee. But those are an effective tool, and that's sort of a best practice that's going on these days.
It's a platform for you to hear from your workforce. It's a platform for you to hear from your employees. That is your most important asset. It sounds cheesy and cliche to say your people are your most important. It's the reality of the workforce.
Yeah.
And you need to find a way to hear from them. And so these stay interviews or whatever they're being called.
Yes, yes.
That's a great way for you to kind of get the feedback of, okay, here's what we're doing well. Here's where we need to improve. Here's where we could, help this person out in some way, shape, or form. That's a great way to help with retention. And I think what you'll find too is when you focus on retention, you're not going to have mobility issues. When you focus on or it's going to communicated.
Yeah, but it shows that you care. This whole concept of quiet quitting, that we've heard so much about, coming out of COVID. This is a great way to kind of get inside the mind and say, what's happening with respect to what are my employees thinking? Because oftentimes I don't know. And now we're hearing this concept of quiet hiring.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Yeah. So I'm getting up to speed on this, but it's apparently this phenomenon where businesses are expanding the roles and responsibilities of individuals without kind of centralizing it, without documenting it, without just memorializing it in some way.
It's a problem. In other words, we're trying to do more with less.
Right.
We've had to do layoffs for X, Y, and Z reason, and so therefore we're going to make this employee wear 3 different hats, and it is destructive in the workplace, and it does not. There are ways that companies really should proceed here. What are some of the things they should do?
So we see it as a big issue kind of in the legal sense where, hey, if the company has this impression or expectation that, the person's responsibilities are going to be X, Y, and Z, but when you look at their offer letter or their job responsibilities, it's A, B, and C.
Yeah.
When there's a sticky termination or there's a dispute that arises,
performance related,
right?
Yeah.
And we say, okay, well, what were the expectations? And the expectations do not align with the documents. That's when you have a problem.
Yes. These are all at the end of the day at-will employees. But listen, if you are going to stick with this was a performance-related termination, and they're coming back saying, "Nope, I was targeted because I'm a member of a protected class," and you say, "Nope, it was performance." Well, guess what? That position description that maybe originally that employee that now is a victim, perhaps of quiet hiring, that performance, those job duties are going to be wildly different than what they're doing now, and they may have some leverage. They may have some grounds there that could come back to haunt the company.
Well, listen, we're a little over halfway through, and we've got a couple more topics to kind of get through. So let's kind of move on.
This is 4 hours long, right?
All right. So another common question / topic that we received just a lot of feedback on, a lot of questions about, is DEI.
Okay.
Really, what is it? How can I go about implementing this? Are there risks associated with it? And so, let's just kind of start with, DEI. what is it?
Yeah, and I think it causes a lot of confusion for people in today's workforce. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are the three. And I think what it does is people think that this automatically is geared towards quotas in the workplace, or I need to diversify my workforce, and that is ultimately a goal of DEI. But here's where I believe it's misunderstood. And again, this is my take on it. Is that I don't think that the purpose of DEI or the goal of DEI is to exclude certain applicants. Like, for instance, you're not looking to exclude white males from a particular job. You can't start off a job search that way. I think really the goal of it is to expand the applicant pool. So, for instance, if you're just hiring, I think of a place like Silicon Valley. I've got to think that there's a lot of homogenous applicants out there, a lot of people coming from Stanford University or wherever, and there's a lot of homogenous applicants. And so when those companies in Silicon Valley are looking to hire, they may very well just stay right in their own backyard. DEI would say, you know what? We've got to expand the applicant pool based on protected classes, even economic diversity. Silicon Valley is a very, very wealthy place. We've got to look at economic diversity too. And I think there are many ways that they can do that and accomplish DEI without looking that they're excluding and, frankly, committing discrimination if that's the route that you go.
I mean, DEI, it's not a one-time thing. No. It's a much broader corporate initiative that really is based in the studies. And I mean, I think the studies show that when you have a diverse workforce, that directly improves profitability, increases innovation, and it helps with retention. And so, we talked about retention before. I mean, diversity in the workplace is something that employees are looking to. And so it's imperative for companies to at least consider DEI. And so, I mean, that's kind of what the motivation is there for. But again, it's not a, hey, we're going to do this one thing to address it. It's got to be much more broader in terms of, okay, here's how we're going to address recruitment. Here's how we're going to address, retention. Here's how we're going to address retaining, and coming up with initiatives and goals that kind of focus on improving underrepresented groups is what you need to do. Where you see companies get into trouble is with quotas. Or just firm numbers where they're making decisions based on protected classes.
DEI does not supplant the concept that you still should be making decisions based on merit. What they really want to do is the goal really is, again, just to expand the relevant applicant pool so that when you're looking at them, you're looking at now a number of people who are traditionally underrepresented in the applicant pool. 2 years ago, they would not have been showing up in the applicant pool, but you're taking concrete steps to expand it. And there's so many ways. The employment landscape is absolutely ripe to do this nowadays with remote work, where your applicant pool, I gave Silicon Valley as an example, but you no longer have to draw right from outside your community, 5, 10, 15 miles away. Now you can look across other areas of California. You can look across other areas of the Midwest and say all across the country and say, here's where we can look to hire somebody. And yes, you know what? Maybe we can do this position remote. And let's face it, with COVID, so many jobs can be done remotely, but where before employers would always claim that they could not.
I think one thing when we're talking about DEI that I've had conversations where sometimes companies get tripped up on this idea that Title VII actually protects all classes.
Everybody,
not just the underrepresented classes. And so was talking with clients and they're saying, oh no, this was targeted on improving diversity and improving underrepresented groups. But if you're taking adverse employment action against someone because of a protected class, even if it's being done under the lens of improving DEI, you're going to find yourself subject to reverse discrimination. I mean, there's cases out there where companies have been dinged for doing just that, all with the best of intentions of improving diversity, but they're taking action because of a protected class.
Yes, and so often optics drive the narrative here, and this is totally an aside. But before we got into the studio, it's 1:00 here Eastern Standard Time, and I went across. I know I walked out with you, and you probably went to the Palm. I mean, the way you do things, it's unbelievable. Get your regular.
I got a salad. Come on,
get your regular Johnson table. I went to Whole Foods and went to the salad bar. But this is interesting, and again, I wasn't even going to talk about this, but I was sitting there prepping for this. My date was this, and there was two tables that a bunch of people just converged. They obviously were from one of the companies like from right around us here. We got a ton of companies right around here, and they all converged. They were all definitely part of the same thing. They all came up at the same time, and there was 19 people there, one female in the entire group. It was just weird. I normally don't look at things that way, but it was so pronounced, and I know nothing about the company. I know nothing. They might be at a convention or whatever, but like that just hit me that I was like, oh my God, there was one female out of 19 people in that whole entire group. You've got to look around your company, and you should not, as we've said before, you should not say, I want half females, half males.
Right.
What you really should be doing as a DEI approach is to say, I'm clearly not reaching enough female applicants.
Right.
What can I do to reach more female applicants so that when I'm making the decision as to who I'm going to hire, still got it based on merit, still up to the company to hire the best and the brightest as they see fit. I want more underrepresented people. And that clearly was a situation where females were underrepresented at that table at Whole Foods.
Are there groups, are there schools, are there organizations that I can particularly target with my recruitment efforts to improve diversity? Absolutely. Yeah.
So then as part of DEI though, then you say, the key is document, because when you ultimately make the decision whether you hire somebody that's traditionally overrepresented or traditionally underrepresented, you better be able to objectively say, and it better be not in your memory but on a piece of paper, like, here's why. Here's why we did it. And here's an interesting aside. So there is, most job applications will say something along the lines of 4-year applications are required. 4-year college. You've got to have a bachelor's degree in order to apply for the job. Well, there's a new trend now to say, okay, that requirement, as opposed to it being a preference, that requirement is actually in itself excluding a lot of people, because there are a lot of people in this country who cannot afford to go to college, who for various reasons, but they may have the skill set that's just as necessary and just as productive as somebody who happened to get a 4-year degree for whatever reason. And so there is a trend now to really maybe take that 4-year college or master's degree, whatever it is, depending on the job, and to say preferred rather than required, because it operates as an outright bar, and it helps to perpetuate this notion of underrepresented classes for a job.
All right, so enough about your lunch observations. Let's move on to
it. Was a good lunch too, actually. It wasn't bad. It was salad. You'd be proud of me. So
the next topic that we got a lot of questions on, and this is one that I think, obviously during COVID, during the pandemic, it was a hot issue to talk about, and it still is today, and that is a remote/hybrid workforce, and really just how to manage that.
Yes.
And I think one of the questions that we consistently received was, how do you manage accountability of your employees, when they're working remotely? Maybe you have one employee who's just not as responsive as he or she would be in the office. How do you manage that situation when you can't just walk down to their office and say, what's going on?
I would say 2 words: spy camera. No, that doesn't work. Darn it! See, I better call some of those clients back.
Works with my kids, but
that's right. Nanny cam. No. Obviously, being facetious here. Yes. No. I mean, I think the reason why I joke about that is I read an article yesterday where a company, and this is not unheard of, and listen, I'm not judging it necessarily, but installing spyware or I guess it's not spyware, it's surveillance monitoring. They can monitor your keystrokes, they can monitor this and that and stuff. I don't know. I guess in certain professions that might be maybe call centers or certain professions, but I don't know. I feel like with a lot of our client base, I talked about at the beginning of this that the whole flex policy is to treat them as adults. I think you really have to be careful here that you're not deviating that you're still treating them as adults. I mean, I think the big secret that came out of the big surprise, not even really a surprise, that came out of COVID is that, listen, people are absolutely as productive or sometimes more productive, oftentimes more productive in different work environments. And so, the notion that, you're not, that's why people would say return to work. And it's really return to the office environment because it was almost like,
working the whole time.
Up until then, we weren't working. So I think you have to be careful on that. That's kind of my thoughts on this.
And I mean, I think, with technology advancements, I mean, there are communication platforms that companies utilize, whether it's Slack, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Teams, that you can communicate with your people, when they're outside of the office. Use those, implement those, and have a policy that kind of lays that out. I mean, you shouldn't be treating your remote or your hybrid employees any differently than you do the employees that are working in the office. Yeah. But you should have policies that say, okay, hey, have a designated workspace. Make sure you have internet. Make sure that you're available on our communication platforms, just like you'd be available if you were, down the hall from me. Make sure you have childcare arrangements. Make sure you're able to work and meet the expectations of the position. Again, focus it on, performance and what's expected of them. Have a policy that spells it out, and really adhere to that policy.
The one thing that I think that companies are still grappling with is, for hybrid work arrangements, do I have specific days that people are expected to come in? And I'll use our firm as an example. We're generally a Monday, Wednesday, Friday in, Tuesday, Thursday is the optional remote. But I think the one thing we do very well with respect to that is we make that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday where everybody mostly is together. We make those connect days.
Yep.
Like, in other words, we do things very intentionally. And when I say we, we've got our great Jenny Salsi and her team that really goes above and beyond to really try to create a real connecting environment. Because if you have a situation where you say, be in 2 days a week, well, everyone's going to pick different days, and so sometimes you're going to come in and it's a ghost town. Well, if I do that, the first thing I'm going to say is, why bother? If the thought behind it is, I'm coming in because of some sort of FaceTime or that I'm going to be able to connect with people, and yet the policy, it has a real disconnect from that. So that's just my own. I know every company's doing it differently. My own view is, I think those days should be really intentionally created for connect days. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to justify why somebody trudges in on a Tuesday when everybody else is, 25% are coming in Wednesday, 25% Thursday. You're not really connecting.
Yeah, it goes back to meaningful engagement. Absolutely. Okay, so we're kind of getting towards the tail end. We've got one other question that we want to get through, and then obviously leave room for some additional Q&A. So on the topic of hybrid workforce, remote workforce, here was a question that we got that I think is a good one. We got a couple on this one. A former remote employee won't return company equipment / hardware. We've seen it, whether it may be a government access card, a laptop, some form of company equipment. What can businesses do to address that? The employee's long gone, and they have something that doesn't belong to them and could really cause some real damage.
Yeah. So the first thing that companies, the knee-jerk, sort of reaction to that would be, I'm not giving them their last paycheck. And that, unfortunately, as much as that self-help remedy would be so easy to do, you're running into what we talked about before, which is the various wage laws that say you cannot play vigilante. You cannot hold that pay hostage. Now, you can do a couple of other things. So if you have a PTO policy, and let's just say your, so paid time off policy, and your paid time policy says we will pay out any unused accrued time when you leave, if you have a policy, you can attach some strings to that, provided, however, that you have cooperated in an orderly transition and that you've returned all company property. That's one of those ones where you can put strings attached, in my opinion. I know PTO is kind of like, there's an open question of whether or not that falls under the Wage Payment Act, but I believe that that's a creature of internal company policy, and most state laws honor that. And so I would always recommend, that if you're going to do a PTO payout when they're leaving, try to use that as a bit of leverage if somebody's not going to, return it.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, you hit it on the head, which is the law, at least in Virginia and most states, is, you cannot withhold wages with the exception of taxes, your standard withholdings, or unless something's been specifically and expressly authorized by the employee to be deducted. But, to address that issue, I think you need to have a policy around, returning equipment. And I think even more importantly, there needs to be a centralization with respect to employee departures. And what I mean by that is, all too often, someone's terminated and, maybe HR isn't communicating with the supervisor or the supervisor's not communicating with HR or no one's shared it with IT. There needs to be a centralization with the process where IT, the supervisor, the decision maker, and HR are all on the same page. So when that termination goes down, and let's just say it's a sticky one where, there could be some concerns, there could be a disgruntled employee, you shut off access. Yeah. That, you have a protocol in place to get the laptop back, to get the government access card so that it's not a bad look with your customer. Maybe, you have, you have a pre-shipped box, go to the employee's address and have them send it to you.
Make it easy. Exactly.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Have a protocol in place because, we've had instances where, there's a lack of centralization. And then there's a termination. The person's not happy about it. And what do? They send a company-wide email just blasting the company, making the company look bad. Or even worse, it includes the government, the customers. It's a bad look. And so there really needs to be centralization with respect to offboarding on all levels, IT, HR, decision makers, CEO level.
Yeah. At its most draconian, you always have the option to file suit. I've had to do that a few times.
Yeah.
That is not what you want to do. I mean, that leaves a bad taste all around. So yeah, definitely not.
Yeah.
Todd sneaking in here with questions.
Oh, this is a good one. Okay. So,
is this like Final Jeopardy?
Yes,
or something?
Yeah. And this is probably, I think we probably have time for just this last one.
All right, I'm going all in. I'm betting all my money.
So given our experience and discussions with our clients, what does the future of remote work look like, say, over the next 5 years?
Wow, that is a great question. I think, unfortunately, I'm a lawyer, so I always say, well, it depends.
It depends. It's a great one.
Yeah, it's a great one. Who am I representing? No. But I think it actually depends on the industry. So that's what I was getting at. Yep. So I think it really depends on the industry. I think there are many industries where many of our clients are completely remote. No headquarters, no anything. Yeah. Sometimes it makes it hard to determine what law applies to the employment relationship, but that's a different topic for a different webinar. Yeah. But I think some industries that can do it should do it. Mm-hmm. But I think the default is going to be some form of hybrid, whether it's 2 on, 3 off, 3 on, 2 off. I think it works. I think it's successful. I think it creates a nice connection. I think unless you can truly justify being in person 5 days a week or whatever, and I see a lot of companies that are doing it. I think Disney just was requiring maybe 4 days, and maybe they have reasons why. But if it's just for the purpose of FaceTime and being in the office and connect, being face to face, I think it's hard to justify.
Yeah, and I would also say too, we've been preaching, all along throughout the seminar, communicate, do that. Engage with your workforce, understand, what's driving them. I mean, there may be some workers who prefer to go into an office and they want, everyone to kind of be back in the office because they like the energy of being in the office. There may be some workers who say, what, I actually do my best work when I'm working remotely. And so I would, rather than make a prediction for, where it's going to go, I would say, use this as an opportunity to meaningfully engage with your employees, get feedback from them, understand what's driving them. That's going to help you with retention. That's going to help you with employee mobility issues. Use it as an opportunity to communicate with them, find out what's driving them, rather than making a prediction, for an entire, industry or group. Use it as an opportunity to engage.
Exactly. No, I think that pretty much sums up exactly what we've been trying to convey today. Do you have any more questions?
No. Okay. That was the last.
I think that's a perfect segue to kind of wrap this up. Yeah. Engagement, communication, documentation, focus on employment. Focus on performance. Don't focus on some of these outside things. Todd is bringing us other questions here. He's no longer crawling. What do we got?
Oh, this was kind of the same one about remote work in the future. Yeah.
Oh,
so
God.
so
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
We
So
covered
obviously
that.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we intend to do, we'll probably do these on a quarterly basis, and we may mix it up. I may be here. Nick may be here. Who knows? But
We may do it at Whole Foods over lunch.
Yeah. Oh man, that's my go-to.
Yeah.
But anyways, so what we'll probably do is reach out to people that went to this, and we're recording this. We're going to be sending this out. Our great production studio, BLC Digital Strategies. Again, Todd Castleberry and his team have been working behind the scenes, and in some respects, in front of the scenes, because he's been crawling over here. Apparently, technology didn't quite work with the questions, so he's been doing it. But
And thank you to participants too. I mean, this was driven in large part by you all, the questions that you had, the thoughtful questions that you had. I mean, the real world issues that you all are facing. So we look forward to kind of continuing this conversation throughout the year. I thought it was a great discussion. So really
yep. Until
appreciate
the
it.
next episode of Be Your HR Best. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.